I mean, yeah, I mean, as someone is, in Europe looking, in on America from the outside, it does seem quite alarming, really, that sort of the breakdown of things in states like California, in cities like San Francisco. There was a video, I think, from Philadelphia recently. Somebody kind of cruising through the streets and just filming these strung out junkies. It seemed like, and it's just that there were just so many of them, really.
Right. You would get the sense that California must be as poor as Honduras by a lot of what you're seeing.
Yes.
in fact, California is as wealthy as ever. So there's something is happening where a lot of the chaos on the ground is not really impacting the ability to just keep society going in a kind of in a larger sense.
Yeah, and I think you see like this kind of incredible denial from the left now.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was growing up, the left was kind of, I thought, socialism, kind of economic left. I mean, I'm a great fan of Mike Davis. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
City of Quartz, Planet of Slums, Dead Cities. These books.
Those books were the early 2000s, mid 2000s, Verso.
Well, City of Quartz is actually like 92.
Oh, okay. It might have been reprinted.
Yeah, Dead Cities is more like mid 90s, 96 maybe. Dead Cities is a collection of individual pieces, and then
Dead Cities.
Dead Cities, yeah. Dead Cities.
I think that's a Future Sound of London album, actually.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was about the same time.
Yeah.
But Mike Davis, I think, he's like it seems to me one of the last great classical Marxist writers. And I know that, J.G. Ballard, who I often post about, discovered him, and he was really fascinated by Davis. Although he also thought Davis went too far, as he says, putting it mildly sometimes. But you can kind of see the kind of modernism that Davis was producing, really, or was a kind of exemplar of, which is, I think, disappeared. On the left, it's completely vanished, and that was something Ballard obviously responded to as a modernist himself, and Davis kind of rooting his analysis in economics in science. There's a great piece in Dead Cities about the kind of how various plant species kind of survive in urban neglect, and studies of how nature kind of takes over once again, how reclaims neglected urban areas and spaces. And also he in that piece he looks at kind of literature exploring this idea of the nature taking over, reclaiming the kind of human.
A bit of an environmentalist, which suggests a kind of later incarnation of left rather than sort of classic communist.
Okay. Yeah, I think he was trying to blend the two. Davis. I mean, Davis seems to have gone pretty quiet now. I know he's sometimes published in the New Left Review, which I think, New Left Review seems to be kind of a bit of a holdout of the old left, of the social left. And, I think he's kind of semi-retired now. Yeah, I haven't seen really much from him, which is a bit of a shame, because I think his analysis is pretty fascinating, and his writing is just wonderful, really. But yeah, that kind of writing has disappeared, I think, on the left, and certainly you won't find it on the right. I think the right is not hasn't really been modernist since, let's say, the 1930s. There hasn't been a modernist right since the 1930s.
Well, in the U.S., there's a significant, highly modernist, economy-centric or economistic right that is still generally prevails. and I thought it interesting the way that the left gets accused of essentially sort of with a lot of their agitation for trans rights and trans ideology as being sort of almost transhumanist, and
Yes.
they're a kind of cultural radicalism. I think it's interesting that on the right you have an economic radicalism that when you combine the two sort of gives you what America is. A kind of a broad libertarianism, a kind of culturally transformative techno-commercialism. Really just kind of sums up what America has to offer the world.
Yes. Well, the transhumanism that you mentioned, I think that is a product of postmodernism, but kind of going beyond the postmodern, I think, and into this kind of virtual realm that Baudrillard talked about. Whereas I think with postmodernism, you still had a kind of relationship with modernism, kind of an awareness that modernism was maybe, there was many good things about modernism, but there was a kind of feeling that you had to leave it behind. That was I think part of the irony, the kind of ironic mode of postmodernism. Kind of half kind of fond of this period of modernism, half it's in support of those goals, but aware that they were kind of maybe unrealizable. But I think once you go beyond postmodernism, which I think we have done now, there's no longer a connection back to that time. There's no kind of awareness of the relationship. I think the Frederick Jameson talked about this kind of loss of historical consciousness. So you kind of live in a perpetual present.
Yeah, the writer Gore Vidal, of course, came up with that quip, the United States of Amnesia, right? And this was in the 80s or 90s, possibly earlier. And all of that has only gotten so much worse. I mean, we have it's just one present crisis after another, and America's lack of history is I don't know how a lack of something. I don't know how zero could become even stronger, but somehow it's become even stronger.
Yeah. I mean, I think Guy Debord of the Society of the Spectacle fame diagnosed this quite early on in the 60s. So late 60s, really 67. The idea of a perpetual present, the spectacle as a kind of hypnotic relationship of images, as he called it, so that people are fixated on the events of the world, no matter how banal they are, and that there is a loss of connection with the past, or also with the future, in a sense that the future disappears, because you're just kind of hyper fixated on the present. And I think the social media, the internet generally, but social media especially, has taken that a lot further now, that we are kind of living in the perpetual present.
That is one way that we have gone beyond, even Gore Vidal's outlook here, right? So we were already ignorant of the past, but now the future disappearing too. That's something that wasn't quite obvious in the 90s.
I mean, you still have science fiction.
No sense of history. Any social theorist could have observed that in the 90s about the U.S., but a lack of any feeling for the future and aiming toward anything in particular, they would not necessarily would have guessed. We in 2021. But you're familiar with Mark Fisher, is that right?
Yeah, I've read quite a bit of
this disappearance of the future. It's just kind of a perpetual 20th century being sort of broken down to its constituent parts and recombinated, and just that indefinitely is something that I really found true about his writings. He's further to the left than I am. I don't share that much, but that aspect of his views, this thing about the future having been canceled, I find that very spot on.
The slow cancellation of the future, exactly. I think he was also a modernist, I think, in spirit, and he wanted that kind of culture which he remembered really from his youth, of post-punk, of kind of new movements in electronic music, like with Warp Records,
I was
but
there in the middle of that.
Yeah.
Not so much out in like the club scene like he was in the late 90s. I wasn't quite at that age yet. I was, I turned 20 in 1998. I did more of that in the 2000s, but and he was of course in London, which is the kind of epicenter of a lot of that stuff too. Bay Area is not too shabby, but it's not London. But yeah, in the late 90s, I recall a speech he was giving where he said the feeling of forward momentum in music in the late 90s was just unbelievable. And I recall that personally. And yeah, but since then, since maybe the early 2000s, there's been a very gradual sort of technical or technological advancement, but just as far as themes and just a general feel of the music, the kind of genres they're invoking, nothing too new, nothing too outstanding.
No, it feels a little bit kind of backward looking, I think. And,
yeah, vaporwave, of course, is an excellent example of that.
Vaporwave, yes. I'm intending to write a piece about this. I mean, I've done a thread, which I think a lot of people have found, but I will repost it about vaporwave. But I think one kind of crucial thing about vaporwave is the relationship to 9/11. And there's a very good album which was put out in 2016, vaporwave album, which is actually called News at 11. And it's kind of it draws upon a lot of samples from the news of that morning. It's kind of a little bit uncanny, and you're kind of placed back on that morning, on a Tuesday morning, September 11, 2001.
I remember where I was. I remember looking at the news. I was a pizza delivery guy at the time.
This. I remember too where I was. I was working in an office in a sort of IT company, and anyway, but I think the relationship to 9/11 is pretty significant because there's a feeling or sense, I think, that everything changed with 9/11. That we kind of we really entered the 21st century with that event, and it was really a transformational event. We passed into a new world. And vaporwave kind of touches upon this. You see some kind of on some of the artwork, vaporwave artwork. The two towers, the World Trade Center, appears on the artwork of a couple of albums, and most of those samples, which appear on vaporwave, because vaporwave is, as I wrote in this thread, is a kind of like a ready-made, in the Duchamp sense, that really. That the artist doesn't really make anything. They just take what is already there and just give a bit of a kind of do some recombination and remixing, and then that's the finished product, right?
Yeah, vaporwave seems pretty informed by 80s and 90s, maybe a little more 90s, sort of PC culture and aesthetics from there. So 2001 onward seems almost too recent for that. For vaporwave,
yeah, they don't take those samples from later. It seems to me, from after 9/11, because that world, the world they're interested in is the pre-9/11 world. They're not interested in what comes after because it's qualitatively different, and something went out of the world, certainly. I think with 9/11, some kind of this desertification, which Baudrillard wrote about, and I've kind of given my spin on it. I think it just kind of accelerated, kind of dramatically, with that, in the aftermath of this event, and also I think, in a way, that the financial crisis was the kind of sequel, in a way, to that event. That we were kind of in a kind of in-between period from 9/11 to the financial crisis. And then post-financial crisis, we entered, I think, this kind of period now that we are still in, of the feeling that things are going from bad to worse.
Yeah, things have become more politically interesting, and unfortunately not interesting in a positive way. At the same time that we've had a kind of cultural stagnation. So the 21st century has seen, for instance, the rise of someone like Trump, which is interesting because you couldn't imagine someone that populist having achieved the presidency in earlier times. And yet we have a kind of, 20th century on repeat, Marvel movies, blah, blah, blah. So cultural stagnation exists alongside interesting political developments, which are, again, not positive, but interesting. So that's kind of...
Well, they are interesting, and I think it's very noteworthy that politics has become this great focal point for almost everybody. That the culture, the meme culture, the dissident right, is really all about politics. Yeah, it's kind of everything is drawn from the political world, and we now have the Rittenhouse trial, and that's become the sort of big focus of everyone.
Cultural output now has a lot more political content than it used to. It just kind of speaks to how politics has become more interesting than certainly music, but movies as well. Music now is just, there's not really kind of a nationwide phenomenon where people are dedicate their selves to this genre of music per se. I'm starting to go off on a tangent, sorry, but so bands, and so like band and musical subcultures in high school are not what they were. They're high school cliques don't break down along fans of certain music lines anymore. It's there's cosplay or whatever, or YouTube comedian or Discord. I don't know.
I think the young people naturally are creative, but now that sort of outlets that were there when I was a teenager, kind of forming a band, or I don't know, trying to become a novelist or something, are increasingly closed off. For example, you can form a rock band maybe, but are the kind of rewards still there really to motivate people to do that? And I don't think they are.
And it seems there are fewer meat space markers for one's subculture and interests now, right? So if you were all into rock music and you had your own band, that suggested leaving your house to go to a dive bar, some kind of performance venue. So much of what people are into now, young people are into, the subcultures can be entirely expressed from your bedroom, from your computer.
That's right. Yeah. Everything's sort of migrated online. And again, this is the rise of the virtual that we've been talking about. And it's not my thing, really. I'm quite a late comer to the internet, really. I started a Twitter account in 2018. And before that, I was kind of pretty offline, to be honest. I did check the news and a few pages. I did read Fisher's blog when he was still writing that, and I think that was one of the best blogs which anybody ever wrote, really.
I came to Mark Fisher late. I wasn't even aware of him until maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Fisher when he was writing that blog, he pioneered quite a few things, sort of hauntology, understanding of what we call hauntology now. The kind of the way that culture is haunted by the past and some kind of compulsion to repeat, which we can see in music, and also the sense, this hauntological sense of nostalgia for the future. That there were future possibilities that didn't come to fruition. Were not fulfilled, and I see Trumpism, MAGA, as a hauntological movement, because I think I remember when Trump was elected, and there were a number of kind of videos, that put together music videos using Trump footage mixed in with kind of footage from the 80s, kind of F-14s taking off from carriers, and all this kind of triumphant Reagan era imagery. And it seems so hauntological to me, that there was an idea that 80s America could have continued, there's that feeling it could have continued on into some glorious future, which was denied, which I think on the right, they see the kind of rise of PC, of Clinton, as kind of stopping that, basically.
Yeah,
So,
Fisher made the point that even when, this obsession with nostalgia, it doesn't manifest as just one constant disappointment, and people obviously find enjoyment in it. And he said that, some of the bands of the early 2010s, a lot of the lectures I saw of his were produced then, and I believe he died in 2015 or so.
it was 17, yeah.
Okay. So a lot of his lectures are from early 2010s, and he made the point that even when he enjoys some of this nostalgia indulgence, it's just not good enough intellectually. He finds it unsatisfying, and we should be aiming higher. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree completely with him. That's this kind of wallowing in nostalgia is conservative. I think in the bad sense that you have to keep going. You have to renew the culture when the culture is kind of so on its last legs, as it seems. It needs to be renewed. We need some kind of movement to renew things. But it's not materializing.
I don't know if there's ever really been kind of like a strong internalized sense in individuals that they must keep culture moving forward. I think a lot of this we mentioned before is driven by material culture, techno-commercial developments, the smartphone, YouTube making so much of the past available now to continually enjoy, whereas you wouldn't have had that option before, and you would have, even if you didn't mean to drive culture forward, we just would have done so inadvertently. So there was that by Simon Reynolds called Retromania, about 10 years old now, I think, and he said, yeah, this was percolating then, this notion that young people aren't moving things forward like they once did, and it basically chalked it up to YouTube. There's just, you can just keep watching. You can discover things even if you didn't already see it. You can discover old things that are new to you.
There's a lot of distractions now. Yeah. There's so many distractions. It's hard to focus yourself. That's true. And I think that if we look, sometimes quite often I post about early 20th century modernists. I'm kind of interested in modernists of right and left, really, both sides, because it's the modernist impulse which I'm interested in, especially. And there's an idea there, I think, on both sides of the political divide, a kind of idea of rejuvenating, kind of rebirth of culture, that they feel, I think, coming out of the 19th century into the 20th century with the First World War and so on, that the kind of West is just declining. The kind of Spengler, hypothesis, right? That things are just winding down, and the kind of banality and ennui taking over and everything, and there needs to be a rebirth of culture. And I think that
kind of thing kind of gives me pause, because Spengler was saying the West was in decline even then, and so there are some people on the right who have always been complaining that it's in decline.
Right.
So it's hard to know when it's sort of more, well, not quite objectively. It's sort of a intra-subjectivity in the aggregate, which I guess can approximate objectivity in some sense. Where you people who never would have complained about things slowing down or something being in decline, suddenly doing that is, I think, better evidence that things really are in decline, right? So you're not just talking kind of a hyper-tracked ideologue or something. And
and this decline kind of, I don't know, decline hypothesis, we might say, was also strong on the left. You can see it in Marx, that he sees capitalism as kind of destroying the fundamental basis of human life. And people like Walter Benjamin, agree, and they think that the revolution is really about rejuvenating the whole of civilization, and bringing about a rebirth. So I think that's quite different to what we see with progressivism now, which is more indebted to the kind of the Whig idea of history as being a kind of inevitable progress, that you just have to carry on this road and things will improve.
Yeah, the left has sort of, I'm sure they're not quite aware of this, many of them, but gradually moved toward a, like you say, Whiggish or maybe small L libertarian position.
Mm-hmm.
I think the term is rad lib, kind of focused on, liberatory cultural expression, especially for disenfranchised groups, and the idea of like collective economic immiseration or something like that. That's just very far from where a lot of them are at now.
It is, yeah, and they seem to be more and more aligned, really, with what Baudrillard called the system, which the system is not simply, in Baudrillard's terms, capitalism, but the advance of reality as such. Yeah, but of course, in the later Baudrillard, reality giving way to the virtual. So they are in line with all that. They're not really opposed to that at all. They don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, you see this kind of from the left wing, Twitter accounts, like the big accounts like Carl Bayer, saying, there's no inflation, things like this. It's not happening. It's just kind of just apologetics for the system, really.
There's a book
I think it's really, and people find it surreal, and I think rightly so. There's kind of a strange inversion which has taken place, where 20 years ago I just thought of the left as the critics, right, of the system, and now they are simply on the side of the system.
Yeah, on the right. On the right, it's a bit sad to see people, acknowledging inflation is happening, but they're only doing it to score sort of superficial points against Biden and the Democrats or what's it's there's a writer named Richard Hania. He's a little too a little too libertarian in the sense of he does a lot of praise for Amazon and stuff like that, a little too much so, but he does make a good point that a lot of republicanism is just kind of driven by a superficial tribalism, where at least the left is an ethos to kind of riff on Big Lebowski or something.
Right. Yes. I mean, there is a kind of a problem on the right, I think, in that there's a kind of focus on maybe abstract values or moral values, and a kind of idea that pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Kind of philosophy.
Yeah, there's still a lot of just that. It's just latent in the right all over the place.
Yes.
I wish they were, frankly, a little more ideological and thoughtful. People like Jordan Peterson push back on ideology. A lot of the classical liberal right just doesn't like ideologues, even if they focus on left-wing ideologues. They are against ideology in general and the propensity of intellectuals to glom onto one, but I think, frankly, they could stand from a little more of that in order to get over that sort of stupid tribalism that Richard Onania is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I do see quite a lot of people who are, I think they seem to be on the right, but they are making kind of Marxist points, sort of class analysis points, which often are pretty sharp, that it seems like a lot of people who would have been on the left 20 years ago have just abandoned the left, and they found themselves on the right and kind of making kind of anti-left points using Marxist. I mean, the famous case, I suppose, is Amy Therese, right? The most famous case. It's kind of post-left. Now, I'm not one who thinks that there's a strictly political solution to all this. I don't think we're going to, do politics which gets us out of all this mess. And I agree with Baudrillard there that it's a much deeper problem with the West itself and the way we actually think and perceive the world, and that has to change. And I suppose it will only change through a dramatic crisis, really, some kind of a drastic situation, and it may take decades for that to come to a head, really, maybe even longer, maybe a century or so. So what do we do until then?
There's a lot about America that is just sort of on autopilot. The political system was made to make change difficult, and Yeah, I don't know what will happen there. But you'd think that in an increasingly globalized world, America's cultural imprint would be getting softer, but it doesn't seem to be. At least in the
No,
English-speaking world, it still has a lot of sway.
it does, yeah. Well, certainly that's due in large part to the dominance of the technology.
Yeah,
The American tech companies are really unchallenged, I think, in that department. And so they still have this powerful reach, but that you can see that that the major powers in the world, China, are kind of putting up their defenses. I mean, there's a kind of great firewall, right, of China,
yeah,
which prevents a lot of our kind of Western madness, I suppose, getting into China. And the Russians are also clearly going their own way, and I think the Islamic world also. And I don't blame them, really. I think it's quite a reasonable thing to do.
yeah,
And as I say, I think what Baudrillard says in one of his interviews, a kind of later interview, like 2001 or so, that the political as a kind of concept or category remains the waking dream of the West, and I think that's absolutely true. That we have this, and you can see it on Twitter, right? This absolute obsession with the culture war, with politics, and the idea of winning the culture war. There's a kind of idea if we can win, then we fix all the problems. Both on the left and the right believe that, and I think this is not sort of taking a bit of a perspective from Jonathan Swift. Really, I think Baudrillard was described by one of his commentators as a Swiftian mind, and Baudrillard kind of looking at the left and right and seeing similar, really, errors on both sides. That both have huge faith in politics to transform the world, and really, I think that's quite false. That it is that the faith in politics as a kind of rational reordering of things is misguided. You cannot kind of reason your way out of this exactly, because as Baudrillard says, it's a process like desertification. It's kind of like you are just moving down a track of where cultural forms die out. You end up in a kind of more and more barren landscape, and politics hasn't got really any solution to that. So what do we do in the meantime until something changes for the better? I don't know. I guess we have to help each other. We have to, look out for each other. Try to engage imaginatively with the world that is before us. Keep our, as we say, our soul alive. Avoiding the sort of what Ballard called the death of the soul as best we can. And that's kind of what my account is about, I suppose, is that idea that really that the battle is kind of a spiritual battle, with all those kind of things which are dragging us down to kind of nullity and nothingness.
Yeah, that sounds like a very continental thing to say, and I feel like it's a little fuzzy what that actually looks like, and that
Right.
I don't. Does that mean you're kind of avoiding making yourself calculable, or I don't know, in various ways, leaving an online imprint or getting off the grid? So if you're getting off the grid, living a very offline existence, is that one to preserve the soul? I mean, what exactly does that?
That might work, yeah, if you could pull it off.
Yeah.
Sure. I think the trap that we face is kind of looking at ourselves in this hyper-rational way, or this, I would call it, very anthropocentric way, which I see on the left now, with wokeness, a kind of like a diseased subjectivity, where it's only what goes on in your head and online which is real. I know, and people are kind of, it seems to me that they are increasingly oblivious to the outside world, which to the landscapes around them. I often write about psychogeography.
And, to be able to live entirely online like that is seems to be a product of a American. It's the third time I'm going to use the term techno commercial, but developments there, and to the degree that people in Europe are living like that, they're in a sense very American.
Yeah.
American culture is famously self-referential, and so you have America's self-referentialism combined with a kind of very online existence that is selfish and within a bubble as well. And you put the two together, and it's just very parochial, in fact.
Yes, and I think it's really, we've got this expression now, touch grass. You should really take it seriously, that
amazing.
The outside world,
as if we're on a spaceship or something. I mean, it's not that bad. Just get out there and actually touch grass. The fact that we need, as if we're like the last of humanity, floating through through space and have no idea what it's to be terrestrial again. It's pretty sad.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely believe that we need the real world, insofar as it is real. Of course, approaching, I would say it's not really real, but we do need the real.
You've heard
world.
the expression "Twitter is not real life." It's true in the sense that most people are nowhere near in such a very online condition that they need the message touch grass. But the kind of people who make high level decisions in both government and in corporate life and in cultural life, they are very online and they do need the message. So
yes,
in that sense, what people are saying on Twitter is absolutely real life, because those people are quite decisive as far as things are going to go.
And I think the online world, the problem with the online world is it's entirely human created and human centric, really. It's just like the inside of the human mind, kind of, which we are exploring, and it's not good for us, really. We need to get outside of ourselves. We need to get in touch with well, whatever you want to call it. Ballard used the term the unseen powers of the cosmos, and I don't think you're going to find them on the internet, really.
Yeah.
So
somewhere between being by yourself online and the cosmos is where I found myself the other day. I was actually happy to spend 2 hours at the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. It's one of the most dreaded things, in American existence. But I actually appreciated it because I was talking to real people face to face for a few hours.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
I actually should wrap this up. It's been over an hour now. But it was. I'm sorry. Did you have one more thought? I didn't want to cut you off.
Just that I suppose as I said, I often talk about psychogeography and the importance of place.
Yeah.
That I think people are losing connections with the places that they actually live, and they not only do they not notice their surroundings, they don't know anything about the surroundings and what has happened there or what continues to happen there, and this is this is not how humans have traditionally lived at all. That we are usually, for the most part, humans have been intimately connected to place, and it really is a kind of source of sustenance, I think, for us. So if we want to avoid that death of the soul, we really need to find place again. So that's really my final thought, I guess.
Yeah, it's nice talking to you.
Great talking to you.
Is that your last name, Hagulian?
No, not at all. This is just my
you don't have to tell me your real name, but I just thought that was that's kind of funny. If it was, I would wonder about the origin.
Maybe I should change my name to that.
Yeah,
would get around the anti anonymity laws.
Yeah. On Skype here it says H Hagulian, like your
name.
Harry.
I just created the account for this, purpose. But hopefully, I will get to appear on a few more podcasts. So.
All right.
Thanks a lot.